retired professor out at Oakland University, Dr. Richard Stamps.
Thank you, sir. I think I'll put it right here for now. When I received a call that invited me to come and speak about the early history of Oakland University, I thought to myself, you know, George Karras should be the one giving this talk. But George is a humble, shy guy, and so it came to me. And I'm really happy to have had this opportunity to reflect, to think, and to ponder. OU was founded really in 1956. 1956. And I would like to have you help me put this in context. Flashback in your mind, where were you in 1956, and what was happening in the world in 1956? What significant technological breakthroughs, perhaps if you've been to see Interstellar, a movie at the theaters, what was going on technologically at the time? And yes, the answer was the Russians put up Sputnik. And some of us remember they put up this little, wasn't it about a basketball-sized little satellite? It was beeping something like the east is red or beep, beep, beep or something. So the question wasn't, what were the ramifications of the Russians putting up Sputnik? How was America doing at that point in time? How was our science and technology? Those of you who remember the Sputnik going up, you remember about 2 weeks later the Americans were going to catch up with them, and it went kind of like this. And we had about 3 explosions in a row. You're too young to remember that, I guess, but it did happen. And also, what was the U.S. government's response? We quickly discovered 2 things. One was technologically we weren't quite as far along as we thought we were. And second, we tried to understand what the Russians were doing. In 1956, how many people in the United States of America could speak Russian or read Russian? Not very many. Similarly, they looked around the world and said there are some other cultures that are kind of significant and important that we have little understanding of. And so the government then put some money into science and technology, and they also put some money into critical language scholarships, most notably Russian and Chinese. Also a little bit of Hindu Urdu. Okay, keep that floating around over here. That was Roman numeral number 1. Now we move to Roman numeral number 2. And it has to do with the Dodge brothers. And I love these new TV advertisements. You all know what year this is? This is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Dodge Motor Company. I think they've kind of missed the boat. They could have done more, but we're thankful for whatever little tidbits we get. So, 100 years ago, the Dodge brothers started the Dodge Motor Company. What we're just coming to understand more clearly now, I think, is the interaction between the Dodge brothers and the Fords, and Henry Ford. And in the early days, Ford was building his car, but he was actually assembling parts. And who was one of the major supplier of parts? The Dodge brothers. And the Dodge brothers, I think the exhibit that's now open in the old carriage house off the side of Meadowbrook Hall, there's the beginnings of a little Dodge family, or Dodge museum. And it's a delightful little museum. And they have some graphics. They have a lot of interesting artifacts. One of the charts, I think, suggests that at one point in time, the Dodge brothers were supplying, I think, 60% of the parts that were going into the Ford automobile. And I see a couple of heads nodding, so thank you. So here's the point. The Dodge brothers were supplying a lot of parts for Ford. Also, when Ford wanted to implement his production line, he needed somebody to build the production line to make the Ford automobile. And who did he turn to? The Dodge brothers. Also, Ford at a couple of times needed money. And where did he go to get money and sell stock? The Dodge brothers. And so there was really quite a struggle for a period of time because the Dodge brothers owned a bunch of Ford stock. And they were kind of influencing how, or trying to influence how Ford wanted to do his thing. And Ford wanted to do it his way, and the Dodge brothers wanted to do it their way. And so there was a certain amount of discussion that was going on back and forth. Then the Dodge brothers die of the flu. Matilda Roush Dodge inherited her husband's millions. And at the time, that's when $1 million was a lot of money. It's been estimated that Matilda Roush, maiden name, Matilda Roush Dodge was one of the 5 wealthiest women in the world, maybe even second, only to the Queen of England. She was a very wealthy woman. And we know that we're taught that it's not good that man should be alone. It's not good that a woman should be alone. And so Matilda, after an appropriate time and meeting a good brother down the street at the Presbyterian Church, met Mr. Wilson, and he was all right in his own stead. He was a millionaire from the lumber business. And so they marry, and it becomes Matilda Roush Dodge Wilson. The Wilsons built Meadowbrook Hall on the property of an old farm. And the farm itself according to information in a 1933 newspaper, James L. Higgins bought the farm from J. Hubble in 1896, constructed the house and several outbuildings before he sold the property, 320 acres, to John Dodge in 1908. And the story goes, and you can't get stories too much better than those told by Barb Thorpe. Nod your head if you remember Barb. Yeah, she's great. My facts are from my experience living on Meadowbrook Farm. Stories told to me by my parents, Frank and Gladys Gay, old neighbors, and Amelia Roush, and information from the Meadowbrook Archives. In 1895, J. Hubble sold his 320-acre farm to James Higgins. The farm has been occupied by Joseph Tolles for several years. In 1897, Mr. Higgins built a Victorian farmhouse. Mr. Higgins was a capitalist from Detroit. I didn't know that. In 1908, John Dodge was looking for a place in the country. He told Mr. Higgins he'd like to buy his farm. Mr. Higgins told John Dodge he would not sell his farm for less than $50,000. Now, you put this in the context. This is 1908. $50,000 was a lot of money. John took his checkbook out of his pocket, wrote a check for the asking price, and bought the farm, lock, stock, and barrel. The farm was called Avon Stock Farm, which John later changed to Meadowbrook. On the farm, there were cattle, Yorkshire hogs, sheep, horses, 2 mules, dogs and cats, also ducks, geese, guinea fowl, pigeons, hundreds of black chickens. Yes. Okay. So this property then was purchased when John Dodge was still alive, and they did come up from the city of Detroit and spent time in what is now known as the John Dodge Farmhouse, which is viewable on Adams Road as you're going north of Avon before you get to the entrance to Oakland University. So Matilda inherits not only money from the car company, but she inherits the property. Matilda and John had planned to build a large mansion, and they'd started the structure over in Grosse Pointe, and they had architectural drawings. They had their beautiful pastel drawings in Meadowbrook Hall of what the original large mansion was to be like. It's interesting that many of those ideas which were shared by Matilda and John were later transformed. After John dies, Matilda remarries Mr. Wilson, and then they decide to go ahead and build their house. Meadowbrook Farms, and cross our fingers, and hopefully in the not too distant future you will see a big sign that says Meadowbrook Farms. You'll see that. Save that for a minute from now. Meadowbrook Farms was a working farm, again, with all the animals. I've been told that even during the Depression, they grew produce, and they had a roadside stand on Adams Road, which used to be called Dodge Road. Look at your early maps, and it was called Dodge Road. Also, as you drive north, drive northerly on Adams Road, when you go past Avon, you go down the hill, then you're coming up the hill. Just as you get to the top of the hill, and on the right-hand side, you see the old, what are now the fraternity sorority houses, which used to be the houses for the workers. If you look real close and you're not going too fast, you'll see on the right-hand side steps that go from the road up to the lawn in front of those houses. There was a banister that came down, made of pipe, and only 1/4 of the pipe banister survives. But the stairs are there, and Stamps goes out every spring and trims the grass around those steps so you can still see them. They were so grown over you could hardly see them, but now, next time you observe, and you'll see those steps that Stamps loves and is taking care of, because it's just a small piece of that large farm that was there. And again, this was an area where they were selling their produce during the Depression. Matilda loved her relationship with farming. She loved animals, and so it's not surprising that she developed some relationships with that agricultural school in East Lansing, which started out as an Michigan Agricultural College, I believe, then became Michigan State University, my alma mater. I love it. Great. So she had this connection with Michigan State. I had heard, but haven't been able to verify, that she served on a couple of their boards and was a supporter of Michigan State activities. And if you go to Michigan State, you'll see there's a Wilson Hall. there's a Wilson Hall, and I think that was part of that early involvement. She got to know some of the leaders there, and at the time, she started thinking about the future. And she had asked the kids, do you guys want the farm? Do you want to heat this Meadowbrook Hall? Do you want to live here in the winters? And the kids were saying, hey, you know, let's go down to the horse country in the south, let's go to Arizona, maybe we don't want the property. So she's starting to think, what do I do with it? And it's interesting where we're meeting today. What is this place called? This is the community house. Mrs. Wilson said she hoped that after she passed, that her house, Meadowbrook, would become a community house. Interesting thought. That it would become a place for community gatherings. And I got access to a photograph recently. A bunch of ladies sitting underneath a tree at Meadowbrook. And I recognized Matilda, and then I've been able to find some of the others. But I took it to Meadowbrook and I said, what was this event? And both Jeff Upward and Madeline, they suggest it was probably the Women's National Farm and Garden Club, which would meet out there. The pictures here, if you recognize afterwards, you want to come up and see if you recognize anybody, you can help us identify people. So she wanted it to become a community house. But she also thought, you know, there's a value to higher education, and we don't have a large university here in Oakland County. Maybe we need a university here in Oakland County. So she's thinking University, Oakland County. I'm not sure of the exact sequence, but apparently she talked with some people like Bob Swanson. How many of you remember Bob Swanson? Lovely guy. And apparently he was the chairman of the board of the Oakland County Planning Commission. Okay, back in the 50s. And he's saying, what's the future of Oakland County? How do we have Oakland County develop? And so there's some thinking about an institution of higher education. So Matilda's thinking of it, Bob Swanson's thinking of it, and then Mrs. Wilson had a friend who worked for Henry Ford. And the person working away in their office accidentally saw a memo. And the memo said, Henry Ford is thinking of sponsoring a university in southeastern Michigan. The fellow who saw this memo thought, this is interesting information. So he leaves the Ford Motor building, goes out to a payphone, because he didn't want anybody to hear what he was going to say. And he just calls and says, Matilda, just an FYI, Henry's thinking of building a university in southeastern Michigan. And if you're thinking of it, and he does it first and you do it second, it's like the Dodges trying to keep up with the Fords. So if you want to do it, you better do it quick before and beat Henry to the punch. Well, then enters a little timeline, a timeline that I picked up from a newspaper article. And it says, November 3rd, 1956, meeting of the Wilsons and John Hanna. And during that meeting, the idea to create an institution of higher education was brought up. I think it may have been at a football game in East Lansing. And Michigan State won, 33 to 0. That was November 3rd. On December 17th, 1956, Woody Varner, vice president at Michigan State, comes to Meadowbrook Hall to meet with the Wilsons. He came down in the morning. He was blown away by Meadowbrook Hall and the surrounds, and at that meeting they were joined with Bob Swanson, who was the chair of the Oakland County Planning Commission. They talked on December 17th about this idea to start a university. They met again on December 26th. Isn't that the day after Christmas? They met again, and the Wilsons agreed to give 1,400 acres, the Meadowbrook Estate, and $2 million for buildings to create a university in Oakland County. The formal announcement was made on January 3rd, 1957. So you always run into the questions. Oakland celebrated its 50th anniversary not long ago. Well, when did it really start? Was it when the idea happened, or when the meeting was held, or when the formal announcement came January 3rd in 1957? Apparently they met in Bloomfield Hills with a group of business and government leaders in Bloomfield Hills, made the formal announcement. So they said, we're going to build a university. So I'm happy for Matilda that she beat Henry Ford to the punch, and this was good. Then a couple of things ensued. One was, if you're going to start a university, what should it look like? What should the organization be? What should the goals and the objectives of the university be? And there were a series of seminars held on the back patio area of Meadowbrook called the Meadowbrook Seminars, and they invited then member of the President's Cabinet for Education, Milton Eisenhower. They invited the presidents, I think, of MIT, Harvard, and a couple of other schools to come and sit around a table on that patio and say, gee, if you could start it all over. See, those presidents, they were bound by traditions. Oh, you can't do that. That's against our tradition. Oh, you must do this. You can't do that. You must require this. You can't require that. They said, hey, if you could just start fresh, clean sheet of paper, what would it be like? And they laid down some principles and some ideas at those Meadowbrook seminars. And so they started a new university. Now, who was involved in the university? Well, it was Michigan State University. And so they came down to start this new school. So if you go to the current OU library, and you pick up some of the good old books, and you open them up, this is a great book. This is Joseph Needham's Science and Civilization in China. Okay, this is volume 1. There are 25 books now in this series. I had to get in my China plug here. Anyway, okay, you open this book, and what does it say? It says, Michigan State University Library, Oakland. So it was MSU O, or MSU Oakland. So they start they start this, they get ready to start this new school. Who do you put in charge? So President Hanna sends Woody Varner, his vice president, down to establish a university. Isn't it interesting, if you go on campus now, there is a Hanna Hall, there is a Dodge Hall, there is a Wilson Hall. Yeah, yeah. The Detroit Sunday Times, this was before my time. I must apologize, I'm a newbie. I didn't get to Michigan until 1970. So I'm a newbie, and you old timers, yes, I understand, I'm a newbie. But anyway, so Detroit Sunday Times, February 14th, 1960. MSUO, 2,100-acre brain farm. School's big goals, thinkers and leaders. Now come back to we're now in Roman numeral 3. Go back to Roman numeral number 1 that said what was happening in the 50s. Sputnik, lack of technology, lack of international global understanding. School's big goals, thinkers and leaders. And so they came down to start a new school. Right now, Michigan State University, Oakland is just 3 buildings. A student body of 535 freshmen, a faculty of 25, and a dream. The dream is to start from scratch and build MSUO near Rochester into one of the nation's greatest institutions of higher learning. The hard-headed realists who are building on that dream haven't any doubt that they will succeed. Even before the first classes opened last fall, the goal was clear. We're out to produce eggheads, not just from the gifted and the brilliant, but from any responsible, able youngster who is willing to work. It wasn't necessarily to be an elitist school, but they were going to push for high standards. MSUO is a sister, but not a twin, of Michigan State University, a pioneer in developing vocational courses in agriculture and applied science and mechanical arts. It's hard to imagine 2 members of the same academic family going in such opposite directions. At MSUO, the emphasis is on learning, not training, on ideas, not techniques. And I must say that when I did arrive at Oakland University in 1974, it took me 4 years to get here, I came in part because of this idea. They were still thinking they were going to be the Harvard of the Midwest. Now, I'm not sure that we ever made it to be the Harvard of the Midwest for a variety of reasons, not the least of which our pockets aren't that deep and we don't have that many alumni who are multimillionaires who can donate. But anyway, that idea was still there, was to create thinkers, not just technicians. I remember as I was working on my dissertation at Michigan State, there was this new concept, this new technology, it was called a computer. And I had to analyze a bunch of data in 73, and so I thought, hey, I'd use a computer. How did you get the information into the computer? Punch cards. Punch cards. Now see, one system would say, well, just train people how to make punch cards and punch input, information. But that Oakland wasn't training you to be a punch card operator. They were training you to think and think of ideas, not techniques. I have to get in a little political jab here. When Oakland started, the concept was it was going to be a state university. When I arrived in 74, 78% of the budget came from the state of Michigan. It was a state school. Does anybody know what it is now? 28%. 28%. So you wonder why tuition's going up? You wonder why people have to get grants and do other things? It's because the state has cut back so much on funding that they're out there doing alternative things. But anyway, okay. Again, putting this all in perspective. So they get the property, they get the goal, they get the idea, they get their students enrolled. But actually, there's one piece that I kind of missed. And that piece that I missed was when they said, okay, the Wilsons signed it over. They said, okay, now come down and set up the university. Well, somebody had to go to Matilda and get the key to Meadowbrook Hall. They were living in Sunset Terrace, that more modern, beautiful house up on the hill. Do you know who got the key? And who walked down and opened the door to go in and assess the situation and say, what do we do? How do we turn this farm and empty property, how do we turn it into a university? George Karras is the man who had the key to open the door and go into Meadowbrook and help establish the university as a university. So my hat goes off to George and all the good things that he did. We should clap for George. I don't know. He's a great resource. So anyway, the school starts, they come in, and they say, okay, well, let's see. Before we teach the engineering class, we better give them the liberal arts classes. Okay, so they hired a bunch of political scientists like Shelley Appleton and a young chemist like Paul Tamboulian to establish, the early basic liberal arts classes. I think in the first semester they flunked a third of the students because they had such high expectations. They had allowed people to come in who didn't have the basic preparation to get in and whatever, but they balanced it out and they kind of continued to work on it. Well, jump with me now 10 years into the future, and it says begin. This is from the Pontiac Press, Tuesday, January 3rd, 1967. 10th anniversary, reflections. And Chancellor recalls talks which led to the university, and they have Woody Varner. But they also have, she makes founding a university seem fun. OU offers rare chance to ambitious educators. But I like this part down in the middle. It says, rah-rah absent, not mourned at OU. Yell no rah-rahs for Oakland University. Still that cheer, for it fails flatly on OU ears. You will look in vain for collegiate traditions on the young campus that are mourned not. The culture here is not a collegiate culture. Assistant Provost Fred Aubert, those who knew Fred Aubert, bless his heart, love the guy. Great guy. His daughter babysat our kids. Our students are not rah-rah. Look at them. There's no school song, no kissing, no rock. Oh, no, kissing rock. Oh, there we go. I'm sure there was kissing going on. No mascot. They have stoutly refused to organize a student government. The lake is calm. They do not throw someone into the lake on May 10th just because it's May 10th. Almost without exceptions, OU is tradition-free. There are several factors that could account for this attitude. For the last couple of decades, traditions have been dying on campuses throughout the United States. And they go on and on. They talk about academic pursuits. So, yes, the school started. It started with the idea of being an egghead kind of a school where they would do academics and not some of these other things. I would also like us to just reflect back briefly. In 1956, this area, and I say this area, I'm thinking Rochester and Avon Township. We moved to Avon Township, you know. Loved it, yeah. Although the transition was happening already. But what was Avon Township like in 1956? Compare and contrast. There was a bunch of farmland, a bunch of farms almost like the Meadowbrook farm. And then I think, what did OU bring to this area? As you pause and reflect. And again, one of the reasons we were attracted to Oakland University, not only did they have one of the strongest Chinese language, culture, history programs in the nation, which I was interested in, but it was the summer home of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. Meadowbrook Festival. Now you stop and think in the early 60s, how many places could you go to listen to music? We didn't have Pine Knob. Oh, it's not Pine Knob, it's something else now. You didn't have the, that's right, DTE, something like that. You didn't have the Palace for music. I mean, you had things in downtown Detroit, but out here in the countryside, we didn't have the music venues to bring those top-notch musical performances. Think about music, about Meadowbrook Theater. How many live professional theater troupes did you have in Oakland County in 1956? You had small ones, Avon Players, and you've got the one down on Lone Pine by Cranbrook. You had some small ones, but you didn't have this larger professional theater. I remember when we came on campus and I was driving around and said, what are all those trailers? And he said, that's where the professional actors live who come to perform at the different plays. How cool was that? Meadowbrook Art Gallery. At one time, Meadowbrook Art Gallery had this, their visitorship was second only to the DIA as far as the number of people walking through their door to see their exhibits. Now that was just a smart design. When you build the art gallery right across the hall from the theater that has people coming to the theater, and then at intermission time you want to get up, stretch your legs, walk around, get a drink, go to the bathroom, and walk into the gallery. So that guy's over there click, 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 counting all the people coming through, but still, the Meadowbrooks brought an art gallery and an art experience to Avon Township. I think that the university also brought kind of an intellectual curiosity to the neighborhood. And that, in addition to the fact that they brought a lot of jobs, I'm not sure, at one point in time, Oakland University was the largest employer in Oakland County. I would think Chrysler probably has a few more now, but still, they brought jobs. Well, all of this, in my estimation, brings a quality of life to Oakland County. You stop and think, what was Avon Township before and after the dream of Matilda Roush Dodge Wilson? And so I think it's significant to see the changes that have come and the importance that has come. And in that light, I would like to say and note, just think of the tremendous impact that just one individual can have. You know, she could have said, well, I'm just going to go live on the Riviera in France and I'm just going to blow my money or I'm going to do whatever. But she had a dream of having an institution of higher education in Oakland County, and she made it happen. The importance of a single individual. Think of what we can do and what others can do. The importance of a single individual. And in that light, it's a little bit of my own, perhaps, viewpoint, maybe prejudice, I don't know, But in the August 1st, 2013 Oakland Press, they said, OU's Russi leaves a legacy of expansion. Some people liked him, some people didn't like him. Personally, I kind of liked him. I didn't like his management style. He was a micromanager. You couldn't get some good things going. I never did get into China. I always felt bad about that. I tried as hard as I could, but food allergies and stuff. He said, I don't go over there and eat that food or whatever. But anyway, you look at the legacy of Gary Russi. I think he was president, wasn't it about 18 years or so, I think? Yeah. And what happened during his legacy? Well, they built an engineering building, they built a rec center, they expanded the Oakland Center, they expanded the library, they built the student apartment building, they got the money for the new Honors College dormitory. The legacy under his time period, a lot of amazing stuff happened. So I went to our PR guy on campus and I said, hey, I have this opportunity to talk to people over at the Historical Society. OU offers humor, introspection, music, theater, and dance. Needs assessments, how to get students into college. There's OU on the front page. The season of the Scrooge. I always like to watch the Thanksgiving Day parade because they have the Meadowbrook Hall singers down there. At Meadowbrook, the Scrooge singers are down there. Crane's Detroit Business. OU gets $3.7 million gift for its Eye Institute. Our Detroit magazine, this one is the 2014 top issues. Transforming Medicine, and there's an article about OU's medical school that's just come online. And so I am going to not be ashamed, but I'm going to pass out some literature. This is just a fact sheet about what's happening at Oakland University right now. And it's amazing what's going on in our backyard. It's amazing about what has happened thanks to the good graces of Matilda. And I don't mean to downplay Mr. Wilson, but you know, he was okay, but he just didn't have what she had. So
she was the boss.
She was the boss. There we go.
I was out there and saw that.
So,
Bridget, I have a story about that.
please.
They met one time, and the Wilsons and Woody Varner, and he said, we've got a good start, but we need another building. And she said, well, how much will it cost? And he said, about $2 million. And Albert goes, I don't know. Oh, Albert, we can do that.
And that was back when $2 million was really $2 million. So I have two more points, and then we'll go for a Q&A, and our time is up. First the bad news, then the good news. To me, there are a couple of landmarks on campus, on Walton Boulevard. And the bad news is the large old barn on the entranceway to Meadowbrook Festival is beyond repair. And so it is going to be deassembled, and if anybody wants to buy a barn, you can get the pieces fairly quickly. So the bad news is the big barn is going down. The good news is the small barn closest to the road is being lifted off the ground, new foundation put in, new roof put on the top, and it is being totally rehabbed. And so there's the bad news, good news. I remember lobbying for those barns years ago, And the president said to me, President Rahs, he said, what do you want me to do, raise tuition and charge these kids more so that we can fix an old barn? How do you justify that to these young kids who are working their way through school to do that? So anyway, the bad news, good news. And then my last point is, it occurs to me, I missed something. Read the paper, I did that. Pass out the fact sheet, did that. Oh, all the hot stuff. Okay, all the hot stuff. That's all that cool stuff that's going on. And then, there's one other thing. Some of you, I recognize, have an OU connection. How many of you have, okay. Get one of those to all the people with an OU connection.
OU people, raise your hand. All the cool kids.
Finally, the university is realizing that alums and retirees can kind of benefit the university. And so they actually have an office now which is trying to put on some activities to welcome people to stay involved. And so that's the involvement sheet. And the last thing I'll say is just, if you happen to have, you know, some old memorabilia of Oakland University in the OU library, in the archives down in the basement, they are amassing and assembling bits and pieces. So I went over to the person in charge and I said, well, what do you want? And she said, if it's got OU's name on it, we'll put it into our archives. So if you have some old stuff that you're just going to throw away anyway, and you want to give it to your kids and your kids don't want it, well, you might get it over to the university and help them preserve a little bit of their history that's there. You've been a great audience. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for listening. And hopefully we've learned a few little tidbits along the way.
Questions?
Yes?
I don't have a question, I just have a statement, but I was there when it opened. And Matilda used to be on campus all the time, and she was very friendly and always wanted to talk to us. And she took us on a tour of Meadowbrook Hall.
Well, I had dinner there twice, a dinner dance for the freshman class. And since I was going part-time, I was in the freshman class for a couple of years. In the ballroom. It was wonderful, wonderful.
Great experience.
Yeah, you mentioned Hubble. Hubble School is on a corner, and that's the school I went through from 43 through 48. One-room school.
That was the corner of?
Adams and Walton Boulevard, which was Pontiac Road at the time.
Which is on the southeast corner,
Yes.
Underneath the mobile station.
And that mobile station is going to be torn down and redone.
Yeah.
I just read.
As a school?
No. I wish.
But you know, there was also a school, the 5 Point School, on the corner of Walton and Squirrel and 5 Points. Yes. And that one apparently,
That was in Pontiac Township.
it was in Pontiac Township, which is now Auburn Hills. And that little one-room schoolhouse was one lot east of the corner of Squirrel. But a student told me that Mrs. Wilson was nice. She let us put a gate in the fence so that the school kids could come out of the small lot the school was on and go into her vacant lot on the corner and play games. Yes, yeah.
She also made a point too that Oakland University would be in Rochester, not Pontiac.
Which is a great discussion right now that I'm not going to touch with a 10-foot pole, because the certain people in the city of Auburn Hills are making a big to-do about Oakland University being in Auburn Hills, not in Rochester. But you're right. There was another comment. Yes.
Yes, I didn't read any promotion on your coming here, and I'm new to the group. Could you tell me what your involvement was in the Department of China Studies?
Yeah, I came to Oakland in 1974, hired into the anthropology sociology department, and I taught anthropology and archaeology and Chinese studies for 37 years until I retired just 2 years ago. And I just had a lovely opportunity to work with all of those China types, and spent 7 of the last 50 years living and traveling in China, and have a love and a passion for it. So.
Would that be your son that's in that department now, or brother? Isn't there another stamps?
Well, that would have been me. If there's a stamps there, that would be me. Yes.
Yeah, my dad worked for Mrs. Wilson when he got out of high school here in Rochester in 1930. He graduated. And the Depression was just going into it, but he poured a lot of, he owned a ready-mix concrete plant down under the bridge, and we poured almost all of the concrete on this stuff in the 60s out there. And I remember we were pouring concrete on the library for Sunset Terrace, and I was standing out next to the truck, and Mr. Wilson came out and was watching us and asking questions, and she came out of the hall, or came out of the house, and she said, "These men don't need you here bothering them, let them go back to work." And he went in the house.
Yeah, I heard similar things like that, yes.
I go back farther than you do, Richard.
Yes, you do.
But I learned a great deal from your presentation today. I loved it. But I want you to confirm something that I heard. And that is, you mentioned Sunset Terrace. And I was told, I don't know if this is true or not, that Mrs. Wilson had Sunset Terrace built and moved there because during the Depression she was embarrassed to be living in such a big house when so many people were hungry and out of work. Isn't it true?
I cannot verify that. George may be able to comment. My understanding was more so that that Mr. Wilson was tired of living in a big old cold mansion-y kind of place, and he wanted some modern amenities. He wanted to live in a modern house. And so his desire was to build Sunset Terrace so that he would have modern day heating and modern day, appliances and the beautiful view. And so that was part of the rationale. I don't know, George, did you ever hear stories that they moved out of Meadowbrook Hall up to Sunset Terrace because she felt embarrassed living in a big house? Or?
She never shared anything like that with me.
Okay, so that's a good one to continue asking the question, and maybe Rod Wilson will find the answer. In the early 50s.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah, it wasn't good.
Yeah, it was after the Depression.
Ron, I want to find out if either George or you remember how Rochester became a mailing address.
Just that she said, I want the university to be. Oh, please tell us.
Pontiac wanted it, and the Rochester schools could not get decent publicity in the Oakland press in the 60s because Harold Fitzgerald was so mad that they didn't get the mailing address. That's a story that's come down for a long time because we were doing bond issues and millage issues and building and everything, and we couldn't get Oakland Press to support our efforts at all.
Interesting.
Back to Sunset Terrace, Roy Rewald, who just recently passed away, that was his first job out of college. His father gave him that job to build Sunset Terrace, so that was well after the Depression. So, okay.
But also on that building Sunset Terrace, the builders, the architect couldn't keep up with the design of the building. They were getting it built before the plans were done, and so the Rewalds really made the plans and built it along the way, and he told me that story.
Yeah, yeah. Roy did some presentations on his father out there and his experiences. They're quite interesting. Any other, Jim?
Yeah, Rewalds were the maintenance people in Meadowbrook Mansion. They were there when the mansion was built. My granddad furnished all the gravel And if you go look at all the seams now for the brick on the building, there's pea gravel in it. Because they mined it over on Brewster Road, just south of Tinkin, and they called that the Rahs pit. Rahs farm was there. And he had a 4.5 yard bin to load the truck, had a 5 yard dump truck. So they put a half a yard of pea gravel in the mason sand.
Anything else? Yes.
I have one more thing to add, because I was a student there early. We had many faculty come down from Michigan State and teach the classes, evening classes. And some of them were held in the turkey barns. So when you say there were only 3 buildings, there were also some other things, places that classes were being held. And at one time I went to an advisor who told me that because it was going to be the Harvard of the West, Midwest, it would never be more than 1,200 students. And if I wanted a full degree, I was going to have to come days because they weren't going to, suit me. And I also heard that the reason it changed, perhaps Richard, you can correct me on this, but the reason it changed from that goal of Harvard of the Midwest to a little bit lesser expectations was that the state said we were not serving the Pontiac area, and that was when Upward Bound was formed to help Pontiac students achieve college degree. Have you heard anything like that, Richard?
Well, I know there was an attempt to reach out to the communities, not just Pontiac, but the larger
local area,
community, yeah, and not to be kind of an elitist school, but to if it's a state university, service the people in the state.
Yeah.
And there's a certain logic to that. Although I think we're fortunate we now have an honors college within Oakland University, so that if you have some high achievers and bright folks that really want to work hard, there are those opportunities. And for students who want to get just a variety of backgrounds, and there are those opportunities available also. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. And I do have a few items I will send you, and you can get them to the artifacts. Proper people.